We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. On the phone, Zoltan Gluck, pursuing a doctorate in anthropology at the CUNY Graduate Center, and Manissa Maharawal, a graduate student at CUNY Graduate Center, a writer and activist. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having us.
And I should also mention that both of you wrote pieces that appeared in Occupy, Scenes from Occupied America.
That's correct.
Yeah.
All right, so you wrote a piece at wagingnonviolence.org. Manissa, tell me how long you were up in Montreal. What got you up there?
Sure. We went up to Montreal last week. It was actually sort of one of these split decisions where we had a friend who was going up and it had come up with us. There are these huge protests happening. I've been hearing about them for months and was actually feeling a little stir crazy in New York and wanted to go up to Montreal and sort of see what was happening on the streets there. And so less than a few hours after a friend mentioned it, we were on a train at 8 a.m. the next morning going up to Montreal. We were there for about 4 days, I think. So.
And Zoltan, who did you have a chance to speak with?
Well, we were staying with a couple of friends of ours who, friends of friends actually, student organizers, student union organizers from McGill and the University of Montreal. And, they're just kind of acquaintances through the kind of the network of student organizers here in New York City. People have been going back and forth to Montreal, and so that type of connection has been established. And so we went up and ended up staying with some really awesome folks. Actually had a really, really interesting time speaking with them, marching with them, banging on pots and pans.
Okay, yeah, I want to get to the pots and pans because that's an interesting element of this. But Manissa, just give us some backstory on this. I think there's many of our listeners who have a vague awareness of what's going on up there, but this is the longest continuous student protest, I believe, in this in North America's history.
Yeah, that's right. So the students voted to go on strike. So the students are organized in student unions sort of on a provincial level and then on a university level. And they sort of collectively voted university by university to go on strike in, I think it was February 14th that they first decided to go on strike. And so have been on strike for over 100 days now, which is just huge. Basically, the university had to end up, the provincial government actually had to end up canceling the semester, ending classes early, and starting the semester in the fall early as well to compensate for the time they've lost. So it's had a huge impact on their semester. And the students voted to go on strike because of tuition hikes that the government's trying to impose on the public universities there over the next 3 years.
Zoltan, when we talk about student unions, I think in this country, when we talk about student unions, we talk about the place where students go and hang out and maybe get there's a snack bar and people play video games. But in fact, there are actual student organizations when we talk about student unions.
Yeah, the student unions have a lot of actual power. I mean, these student union representatives sit on the education boards, both at the university level as well as at the city level, the provincial level. They've shown that power repeatedly. This is not the first strike that the student unions have put on. The reason why the tuition is lower in Quebec than the rest of Canada is because the student unions are able to muster a tremendous amount of support from students at a very broad level. They've put a huge amount of pressure on the administrations in Canada since the 1960s and have effectively prevented tuition from going up in Quebec over the last 50 years. Really, it's been pretty amazing. The last major strike was in 2005. Which is actually quite important for understanding the dynamics of this strike now. Then they went on strike. One of the unions ended up striking a deal with the government, and so the united front of the strike ended up breaking, and there were some concessions made at that point in 2005, and some of the other unions were quite upset with the way in which it played out. Some people were enfranchised, other people were left out. This time around, on the other hand, there's been a totally united front across the board, across the student unions, and they've managed to be unified, going for 9 days. The largest protest so far was on May 22nd. They had estimated anywhere between 300 and 400,000 people on the streets, just to give you an idea of the type of scale that we're talking about here.
300, 400,000 people. And Manissa, on a daily basis, there's consistent protesters in the street. Isn't that right?
Yeah, so every night at 8:30, and they've been doing this for months now, people meet up, and I think they say the daily, nightly protests are smaller, clearly, but they're between, when we were there, they said the average was 3,000 people. We were at one that was 5,000 through 10,000 people, so these are still thousands of people on the streets every night. But nightly they meet up around 8:30 in the center of the city and sort of go on a march. And the march is unplanned, and no one knows where it's going to go, and they sort of march around, and they get real, I think what was amazing was seeing how much neighborhood support they had. You had people out their windows banging pots and on, getting on the streets with them. And what's been happening more recently is that in neighborhoods, people will start protesting in their neighborhoods, like taking over an intersection, and then they will start marching and join up with this larger march. So it's sort of, you get the feeling that it's every night, it's all over the city, it's sort of an event that happens, and everyone's excited about it. And, at 8 o'clock, everyone starts banging their pots and pans. 8:30, everyone starts marching. By 10 o'clock, there's a huge march with thousands of people walking through the city. It feels really joyful. It was really inspiring. The energy was really amazing.
Yeah, one of the things you touch upon in your piece, Manissa, is this notion that the groundwork for these protests has been laid for the past couple of years, where the students have been going out into the communities and educating them. And I think at one point someone spoke about opening up a certain amount of space to converse. Talk about that a little bit, because I think, as we talk about this and we look at any type of parallels or any type of lessons for the Occupy movement, this seems to be a very interesting element.
Yeah, definitely. I think when we were up there and just feeling the energy and being amazed at how many people were on the streets all the time, I kept asking the organizers that we were with, how did this happen? How did you get thousands of people on the streets? And they're like, there's no secret. We've been working on this for years. And I think that was just a really important moment for me. I feel like as an activist, I get sort of impatient often. And it was really important for me to hear, we've been working on this for years. We've been standing on corners. We've been talking to our colleagues. We've been handing out flyers. We've been having discussions in our student unions for years now. Really since 2005, but more recently, in the past 2 years, they've known that these tuition hikes are coming, and they've been trying to work really hard to build popular support against them. And I think the part of building that popular support is connecting the tuition hikes to things like increased debt and to things like austerity policies in Quebec and in Canada generally. So sort of saying, this is about tuition hikes, but it's actually about issues that affect everyone in society.
And Zoltan, another part of this, of course, has to do with the notion of Quebec nationalism. And you mentioned that you were staying with McGill University organizers as well as, and I mentioned that because McGill is an English-speaking school. And I'm curious as to what extent McGill has been students have been involved as opposed to students from the French-speaking university, and where how does that divide play out?
Right. Well, from what I understand, yes, McGill students have been significantly less involved than the other Francophone university in Montreal and across Quebec. And this has to do, from what we understood from some of the organizers, and these were McGill organizers, these were Francophone McGill organizers who have been involved with various unions for the last few years and have been trying to organize at McGill and are involved with organizing at some of the other universities as well, is that by their accounts, McGill is it is the most elite university in Quebec. It is predominantly Anglophone. It's more conservative, and which goes along with it being a more elite institution. And there's been a lot less support for the protesting on student strikes. The Francophone universities have been really the hotbed of organizing, have been the places where there's more student radicalism, where there's more successful outreach being done, and where the kind of vote for the strike really came from. And this plays into a longer history. I think, all of these struggles need to be really thought of in terms of the states being played out through them. You could say the same thing about the struggles of CUNY, of course. Maybe that's something we can get back to later. But the particular history at play here is, the tendencies in Quebec for wanting more autonomy, wanting secession at the level of the French community in Quebec, and feeling a general level of kind of oppression coming down from the broader Anglophone country that is Canada, and the kind of subordination of the French population in Quebec. So there is definitely a working class and nationalist flavor to some of the student protests that is really important to understand. There's also kind of not very well understood, and I think that goes into a longer history of the relationship between the French population in Quebec and the broader country of Canada, and a feeling of a type of working class identity of the Quebec Francophone community vis-a-vis a more elite ruling class, if you will,
and my
community in Quebec.
And my sense is, and I don't know which one of you can speak to this more, Manissa, what can you tell me about Bill 78? Because my understanding is not only Bill 78 was essentially the legislation passed or to quash essentially protest in this country, and or I should say in Quebec, and it was incredibly, I guess, damaging for the politicians who supported it, and generated a lot more protest.
Yeah, so since Bill 78 has passed, the protests have grown, right? And this is another way that people have been sort of seeing the connections between, increasing tuition and protests against increasing tuition and the suppression of dissent. Right? And so Bill 78 was a direct attack on the freedom of assembly and the right to protest in Quebec. It makes it so that you can't have an unpermitted march or an unpermitted gathering of more than 50 people. And it also has these huge fines against student unions, against organizers, directly targeting student leaders and union organizers who would be planning these things, levying thousands of dollars of fines against them. And also sort of saying that you have to give the police your march route 24 hours in advance, and just sort of really directly attacking the way that the students have been on the streets every night, sort of taking the streets on these sort of joyful, impromptu marches, and saying you can't do that anymore. And I think the response has been that people have really been like, oh, wait, if they can pass a special law like this, it's a special law, right? If they can pass a special law like this just to suppress the student movement, right, what does that mean for all of our civil liberties? And so people have really sort of taken this up and sort of it's broadened the struggle in Montreal right now and in Quebec right now. A lot of the chants when you're on the streets are about student debt, but they're also against the law. And so when we were up there, actually, we saw the first time that they were actually using the law to have mass arrests. So they arrested 500 people at one of the nightly marches we were at. And it was really sort of out of nowhere. Everyone's marching along really peacefully, really joyfully. Suddenly you're surrounded by cops in riot gear on either side of you, and they're just arresting everyone in between them. And we'd been marching for hours, and it felt really random, right? And really repressive. And I think people in Montreal are really viewing this as not just about students anymore, but about everyone's right to protest, to assemble, to express dissent.
Zoltan, what happens next? I mean, what are the students obviously are specifically focused on rolling back this tuition hike? What is there a sense that could possibly happen soon, or what is the what are the organizers anticipating will happen over the next 2, 3, 4 weeks, or 2 or 3, 4 months? What is their timeline? What are they anticipating?
Yeah, that's a really important, interesting question. It was one that we kept on asking our friends and kind of acquaintances, student organizers up there. I think that they're quite humble about the prospects of gaining immediate victories, and I think that's always a realistic position to take. But I think what we've seen over the last few weeks is, as Manissa is referencing, a tremendous amount of support just coming out right now. I think there's a gambit that the Tsarist government, that's the prime minister, really played with this special law, this state of exception law, this temporary law, which is highly repressive, really draconian, has completely failed, and it might result in them having to make massive concessions, because while the student movement was kind of, from my understanding, in a bit of uncertain straits before the special law was passed, now the popular sport has just exploded, and it doesn't really seem like it's going to die down over the summer. So, I mean, I think what student organizers are hoping is to carry momentum through the summer, which, I mean, as we know, as student organizers, is always the most difficult aspect. I mean, school gets out, people go away for the summer, there's not the same type of institutional structure, and it's hard to keep momentum going. They have economic disruptions planned for the summer. There's like massive festivals, there's massive events in Montreal over the summer, and to keep the pressure on the government to say we're not going away, you can't just have business as normal, you need to take us seriously. I think they're planning on keeping these nightly protests going. They're planning on disrupting life as normal in Quebec, and I think what's amazing is that they have the support to do so from the broader population. So I think you can anticipate this thing sticking around for a while, and I mean, a victory in Quebec would be a victory for everyone. I think a victory, and everyone's looking there right now. They're kind of the vanguard of student struggle, at least in North America.
Is Zoltan, finally, operationally speaking, do you think what lessons do you think the Occupy movement can take from this? Is taking from this?
Yeah, that's also a really difficult question to answer, but I think that people are explicitly looking to Quebec with that question in mind. This is a discussion that's going on at various levels, at different types of assemblies, in various organizing groups. There's going to be an assembly this Sunday at Washington Square Park at noon, which is organized by various education-oriented Occupy working groups, that is going to be explicitly asking this question of what types of lessons we can learn from Quebec in terms of organizing around education here. Of course, it's really difficult to translate their organizing structures into U.S. context. As you've said, we don't have the same type of strong student unions. But there are some real important lessons. The one Manissa said, like that when they saw that these tuitions were going to come into place, these tuition hikes were going to come into place, they started organizing 2 years in advance, and that's really paid off for them. For example, we've had 35% tuition hikes over the next 5 years put into place last fall at CUNY. We organized a couple of months in advance. We really started organizing in the summer, and when the Board of Trustees meeting happened where they were going to be voting on this, we had a good few hundred people out. And that, I think, is like commensurate with a couple of months of organizing that we had. If we'd been putting in organizing a couple of years in advance, who would have really known what we could have accomplished? I think it's also important to remember that the police repression that happened after our protests of the tuition hikes on November 21st at CUNY, they arrested 15 students. A week later, about 3,000 people came out to show support, and that's the same type of pattern that's been happening in Quebec. So I think one of the things we can immediately learn is that trying to broaden the struggle, trying to organize in advance for things we see that are symptomatic of this new regime of austerity that's being applied all across the world right now, I think it's one of the major lessons we can learn, and trying to just speak with organizers about what types of tactics work in terms of pulling out people, what types of outreach tactics work, those types of things. But, I mean, this is an ongoing conversation. Again, it's going to be continued on Sunday at noon in a big public forum type of way. It's happening in private conversations all the time. So I think these are important things.
Manissa McLeave, Maharawal, and Zoltan Gluck, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. We'll put a link to your piece at majority.fm and as well to the book to which you contributed, Occupy Scenes from Occupied America. Thanks for joining us.